The mahogany drawer slammed onto Aaliyah's fingers with a bone-crushing crack, pinning her to the desk before she could even register the shadow behind her. A sharp, jagged scream died in her throat as a gloved hand lunged from the darkness, twisting into her hair and wrenching her head back until her spine felt ready to snap. Her world tilted into a blur of teal moonlight and cold mahogany. "The data is encrypted, Aaliyah," a voice whispered, smooth, chilling, and far too close. It was Jinwoo Han. The man she had spent 6 months serving with bowed head and lowered eyes was no longer the distant Ice King. He was a predator who had finally closed the trap. He leaned over her, his face inches from hers, and for the first time she saw the demonic red glow in his eyes, a psychotic fixation that turned his handsome features into a mask of pure, unhinged obsession. The metallic click of a Beretta's safety being disengaged echoed against her temple. The barrel was cold, a stark contrast to the searing, rhythmic throb in her crushed hand. "But your pulse," he murmured, his breath hitching as he inhaled the scent of her fear. "That's something I can read perfectly. It's racing, it's screaming, it's finally telling me the truth." Aaliyah's breath came in ragged gasps. She had played the invisible Maid to perfection, or so she thought. She had documented his meetings, bugged his vents, and bled his empire dry of its secrets. But as his grip tightened, ripping strands of hair from her scalp, she realized she had never been the one in control. "I was so good to you," he hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly tender register. "I let you into my inner sanctum. I let you breathe my air. I even let you think you were winning. Did you really think a fake Ghanaian passport and a few cheap wires could hide the scent of a state-sponsored rat?" He shifted, and she saw the single red rose tucked into his lapel. It was dripping, thick crimson droplets staining his sleek black suit, blood from the extraction team she had been waiting for. "I haven't just been watching you, Aaliyah. I've been worshipping you," Jinwoo whispered, his free hand tracing the line of her jaw with a ghostly, possessive touch. "Every night I watched you transmit your reports. Every morning I watched you pretend to be the clumsy girl who couldn't even keep my espresso at the right temperature. You were a masterpiece of lies, and I fell in love with every single one of them." The gun barrel ground harder against her bone. In that moment, the terrifying reality set in. This wasn't a mafia execution. This was a lover's quarrel where only one person was allowed to survive. "But masters don't like it when their masterpieces try to run away," he breathed. "You betrayed the only man who truly saw you, and now I'm going to make sure you never belong to anyone else. Not the state, not your handlers, not even the world of the living." Aaliyah moved through the sprawling Han estate like a shadow, a ghost in a black uniform and white straps who existed only to polish the edges of a monster's life. 6 months ago, the National Intelligence Service had stripped her of her name and replaced it with a tray and a duster. Her mission was to be a vacuum, to suck up every scrap of data, every whispered phone call, and every lead on the syndicate's offshore holdings without ever leaving a footprint. In the beginning, she was convinced she was winning. She spent her mornings buffing the marble floors of the grand foyer, her eyes tracking the movements of the armed guards while her mind mapped the blind spots in the security cameras. She was a master of the maid's posture, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downward, a mask of humble obedience that made her invisible to the men who traded lives over breakfast. Jinwoo Han was the most difficult variable. He was a man of frigid routine and surgical silence. During those early weeks, Aaliyah would enter his study to deliver his morning coffee, moving with a practiced clumsiness that she used to lower his guard. She would deliberately tremble just enough to rattle the porcelain cup, a tiny flaw designed to make her seem beneath his notice. She remembered the way he would sit behind that massive mahogany desk, his silhouette framed by the teal light of the Seoul skyline, never once looking up from his ledger. She had felt so clever then. While she set the tray down, her nimble fingers would expertly plant a micro-transmitter under the lip of the desk or swap a dummy USB drive for the one he'd left in his laptop. She would leave the room with a soft bow, her heart hammering a triumphant rhythm against her ribs. She was Agent Phoenix, the woman who was dismantling an empire one tea service at a time, and the Ice King didn't even know her name. But looking back through the lens of her current terror, the memories took on a sickening new shape. She remembered the way the air in the room would grow heavy and still the moment she turned her back to leave. She recalled the sensation of heat on the nape of her neck, a prickling awareness she had dismissed as simple nerves. It wasn't nerves, it was him. One afternoon, while she was dusting the bookshelf in his private library, she had slipped. A small, leather-bound journal had fallen, and as she reached for it, she felt a presence looming behind her. She hadn't heard him move. He was simply there, a wall of cold, expensive cologne and silent menace. "You're very thorough, Aaliyah," he had said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to hum in her very marrow. "I only wish to do a good job, sir," she had whispered, keep her gaze fixed on his hand-stitched leather shoes. He had reached out then, his fingers hovering agonizingly close to her shoulder before retreating. Most people look at the spines of books. You look at the dust on the shelves behind them. You look for things that are hidden. She had forced a nervous, high-pitched giggle, the sound of a girl who didn't understand the weight of his words. "My mother always said the truth is in the corners, sir." "Your mother was a wise woman," he replied, and for a fleeting second she had looked up. She saw him watching her with an intensity that should have signaled an alarm, a dark, hunger-filled gaze that wasn't looking at a maid but at a prize. She had thought she was the hunter, carefully baiting a trap with her own feigned vulnerability. She hadn't realized that Jinwoo wasn't falling for her deception. He was falling in love with it. He wasn't being fooled. He was being fed. Every lie she told was a thread he used to weave a web around her, transforming her mission into a courtship of shadows until the invisible girl became the only thing he could see. The shift from professional curiosity to predatory obsession didn't happen with a shout. It arrived with the scent of crushed velvet and iron. Aaliyah returned to her small, sterile staff quarters after a 14-hour shift, her muscles aching from the performance of being nobody. She had spent the evening in the vents of the West Wing, sweating in the dark as she bypassed the syndicate's primary firewall. She felt untouchable, a phantom who had just siphoned $3 million into an untraceable NIS holding account. But the moment she pushed open her bedroom door, the air in the cramped space felt different. It was heavy, charged with a presence that hadn't quite left. There, sitting in the center of her narrow cot, was a single red rose. It was impossibly vibrant against the drab gray of her regulation linens. Aaliyah froze, her hand still hovering over the light switch. Her first instinct was to scan the room for a threat, her training screaming that her perimeter had been breached. Who had been in here? The head housekeeper never entered the maid's quarters without a formal inspection. The guards were forbidden from this floor. She stepped closer, her heart drumming a frantic warning against her ribs. The rose wasn't just a flower, it was a masterpiece of cruelty. Its thorns had been meticulously sharpened, glinting like tiny glass shards in the dim light. As she leaned in, she realized the petals weren't just red, they were damp. A dark, viscous fluid pooled at the base of the bud, soaking into her pillowcase in a blooming crimson stain. It wasn't dew, it was fresh blood. Resting beside the stem was a small, hand-torn scrap of vellum. There was no name, only a single sentence written in the precise, elegant calligraphy she had seen on Jinwoo's desk 1,000 times. "I see the thorns you hide beneath the wool." A cold sweat broke across Aaliyah's skin. The message was a death warrant wrapped in a romantic gesture. The wool was her uniform, her disguise. The thorns were her skills, her secrets, her very identity as an operative. He wasn't just suspicious, he was certain. He had sat in this very room, perhaps on this very bed, and waited for the silence to tell him who she really was. She should have run then. She should have triggered the emergency extraction protocol and disappeared into the Seoul fog. But the Ice King had anticipated her fear. When she moved toward her closet to grab her go bag, she found it gone. In its place, her maid's uniforms had been rearranged. They were now hung by color, perfectly spaced, with the red roses twin pinned to the breast of each one. He was marking her. This wasn't the behavior of a mob boss protecting his assets. This was the behavior of a collector claiming a rare specimen. He didn't want to kill her, not yet. He wanted her to know that she was trapped in a cage of her own making, and that every secret she thought she was stealing was actually a gift he was allowing her to take. Aaliyah picked up the rose, the sharpened thorns piercing the skin of her thumb. A single drop of her own blood joined the rest on the pillow. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted forever. She wasn't an agent on a mission anymore. She was a woman being hunted by a man who found her betrayal erotic, a man whose love was indistinguishable from a slow-motion murder. She looked at the blood on her hand and realized that for Jinwoo Han, the game had only just begun. Panic was a luxury Aaliyah couldn't afford, even as the blood from the rose thorn prick dried on her thumb. She convinced herself that the rose was a test, a psychological mind game intended to rattle her into making a mistake. If Jinwoo Han truly knew everything, he would have had her dragged to the basement weeks ago. Or so she told herself as she moved through the darkened corridors of the estate toward his private vault. This was her final play. The Vault of Secrets wasn't a physical safe, but a server room tucked behind the library, protected by a biometric scanner and a rotating 12-digit cipher. She had spent months clumsily cleaning the keypad, using a specialized ultraviolet spray to track Jinwoo's finger movements. 2 days ago, she had finally intercepted the final sequence. The air in the library was frigid, smelling of old paper, and the metallic tang of high-end electronics. Aaliyah moved with feline precision, her maid's slippers making no sound on the polished wood. She reached the hidden panel behind a row of law texts and tapped in the code. The sequence worked instantly, 492011. The heavy steel door recessed with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Aaliyah slipped inside, the teal glow of the server racks bathing her skin in a ghostly light. Her hands shook as she pulled the master drive from her pocket. All she needed was 5 minutes. 5 minutes to download the offshore account numbers and the list of corrupt officials, and she would be over the perimeter wall before the sun touched the Han River. The progress bar on her handheld device flickered to life. 10%, 30%, 55%. She held her breath, her eyes darting to the security monitor she had looped. The hallway remained empty. The house was a tomb. But as the download hit 80%, the teal lights of the server room suddenly pulsed, turning a violent, strobing red. The screen on her device didn't show the data she expected. Instead of bank codes and shipping manifests, a single file directory appeared. It was titled Aaliyah. With a sinking dread that felt like lead in her stomach, she clicked it. Thousands of files appeared. High-definition photos of her sleeping, recordings of her whispering into her comms in the middle of the night, scans of her actual NIS file, her real birth certificate, and photos of her family back in Ghana. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The codes hadn't been stolen. He had moved his fingers in slow, deliberate patterns on that keypad because he knew she was watching. He had left the server room vulnerable because he wanted her right here, at the heart of his world, where he could finally close the door. Aaliyah lunged for the exit, but the heavy steel door began to slide shut. "The encryption key is obsession, Aaliyah," a voice boomed over the room's intercom, distorted and low. "I thought you appreciate the irony." The door thudded home, the locks engaging with a finality that echoed in her soul. She was trapped in a room full of her own secrets, surrounded by thousands of digital eyes that had been watching her every move for months. She looked up at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. The small lens was ringed in a glowing red light, mimicking the demonic fixation she had seen in Jinwoo's eyes. She hadn't been siphoning his secrets. He had been harvesting hers. The Vault of Secrets wasn't his, it was hers. And as the oxygen in the small room began to hiss, She realized that every step of her mission had been a choreographed dance designed by the very man she was trying to destroy. The pneumatic hiss of the vault door reopening didn't signal freedom, it signaled the arrival of the end. Jinwoo stood in the frame, his tall silhouette draped in a dark, hooded overcoat that made him look like a spectral executioner. He didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he extended a gloved hand, his fingers splayed in a silent, terrifying invitation. "Come, Aaliyah," he said, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "Since you enjoy looking into corners so much, let me show you the one I've reserved for you." He didn't drag her. He didn't have to. The sheer weight of his presence, coupled with the knowledge that the estate was a locked fortress, compelled her feet to move. He led her through a concealed passage behind the library, a part of the mansion she had never seen in all her months of thorough cleaning. The air grew colder, smelling of floor wax and something sickly sweet like decaying lilies. They stopped before a heavy oak door at the end of the hall. Jinwoo pushed it open, and the breath died in Aaliyah's throat. The room was bathed in a harsh crimson rim light that made the walls bleed. It wasn't a bedroom or an office. It was a sanctuary of madness. Thousands of photographs were pinned to the walls in a chaotic, overlapping collage. There she was, sleeping in her staff quarters. There she was, tasting the soup in the kitchen. There she was, focused and intense as she planted a bug in his study. But it wasn't just photos. Jinwoo walked to a glass display case in the center of the room, his eyes glowing with that terrifying red fixation. Inside, laid out like museum artifacts, were her things. A hair tie she thought she'd lost in the laundry, a half-empty tube of lipstick, the Ghanaian coin she kept for luck, which had vanished from her bedside table weeks ago, even a discarded bandage from a paper cut she'd suffered in the first month. "I've spent every night here," Jinwoo murmured, his hand hovering over the glass. "While you were busy playing your little games of espionage, I was preserving you. Every piece of you that you dropped, I caught. Every breath you took in the dark, I recorded." Aaliyah felt a wave of nausea roll over her. The invisible maid hadn't been invisible at all. She had been a specimen under a microscope. He hadn't just discovered her betrayal. He had nurtured it, finding a sick, erotic thrill in the way she lied to his face. "This is your throne, Aaliyah," he said, turning to face her, his features sharp and predatory in the red light. "I've built a world where you are the only thing that matters. I've cleared away the distractions. Your handlers, dead, your files, deleted. There is no Agent Phoenix anymore. There is only the girl in this room." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the shrine he had built for her. He reached out, his thumb grazing her bottom lip with a touch so tender it was agonizing. "You wanted to steal my life, but you ended up giving me yours. That is my mercy. I won't turn you over to the syndicate to be tortured for your treason. I'm going to keep you here in the heart of the house until you forget there was ever a world outside these walls." The walls of photos seemed to close in on her, thousands of her own eyes staring back at her in various states of unawareness. She realized then that Jinwoo didn't want a wife or a lover. He wanted a captive ghost. He had turned his obsession into a tomb, and he was inviting her to lie down inside it. Aaliyah's hand dipped into the hidden pocket of her apron, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold, jagged edge of the emergency beacon. It was a last resort, a high-frequency burst designed to pierce any jammer and alert the NIS extraction team that the mission had gone black. As Jinwoo stood with his back to her, admiring the wall of stolen memories, she clicked the recessed button 3 times. 1, 2, 3. She waited for the vibration against her thigh, the haptic feedback that would confirm the signal had cleared the estate's thick stone walls. Nothing happened. The silence in the shrine was absolute, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the red lights. Aaliyah clicked it again, her thumb bruising against the plastic. "Please." She imagined the black helicopters crossing the Han River, the tactical teams breaching the gates, the end of this suffocating nightmare. "The frequency you're looking for is 440.2 megahertz, Jinwoo said without turning around. His voice was conversational, almost bored. It's a clever little burst, very discreet, but it's currently broadcasting into a vacuum. Aaliyah's heart plummeted into her stomach. She didn't move her hand, her fingers still locked around the useless plastic. You can't jam every frequency in Seoul, Jinwoo. I don't have to jam the city, Aaliyah. I only had to jam the receiver. He finally turned, a slow, predatory rotation. He walked toward a heavy velvet-covered table at the edge of the crimson light, his movements fluid and terrifyingly calm. You were waiting for Agent Miller, weren't you? The man who told you that you were doing God's work while you emptied my accounts. He reached for the edge of the velvet cloth. With a sharp, theatrical tug, he whipped the fabric away. Aaliyah's knees buckled. There, resting on the polished surface like a discarded piece of trash, was a severed hand. It was pale, the fingers curled in a final, frozen gesture of reaching for something that wasn't there. On the ring finger was the distinctive silver band Miller always wore, the one he'd told her was a gift from his daughter. Resting in the center of the palm was the matching receiver to her beacon, its blue light blinking a steady, mocking rhythm. He was waiting at the extraction point in Gangnam, Jinwoo whispered, stepping into her personal space until the scent of his cologne, cold and metallic, choked her. He thought he was the one pulling the strings. He didn't realize that in my world I own the strings, and the hands that pull them. He picked up the receiver and dropped it. It hit the floor with a plastic clatter, the blue light finally flickering out. No one is coming, Aaliyah. The signal didn't die because of a jammer. It died because the only person listening to you is me. The room felt like it was shrinking, the thousands of photos on the walls leaning in to witness her collapse. The beacon in her pocket felt like a hot coal, a reminder of her utter isolation. Her team, her mission, her safety net. It had all been dismantled with the same surgical precision Jinwoo used to manage his empire. He reached out, his gloved fingers catching a stray tear before it could fall down her cheek. He tasted it, a slow, sickening movement that made her skin crawl. "Don't cry for a dead signal," he murmured, his red eyes boring into hers with a terrifying tenderness. "Why look for the world outside when I've brought everything you need right here? You are the only thing left of the NIS in this house, and I intend to keep it that way." Jinwoo moved to a tall, gilded mirror that stood like a sentinel amidst the chaos of the shrine. He didn't look at his own reflection. He looked at hers, catching her wide, terrified eyes in the silvered glass. He pulled her toward him, not with the brutality of a captor, but with the steady, suffocating weight of a man coming home. He forced her to stand before the glass, his hands resting heavily on her shoulders, framing her small frame against his towering silhouette. "Look at us, Aaliyah," he whispered, his voice vibrating against her spine. "Strip away the maid's uniform, strip away the blood on my suit. What do you see?" Aaliyah tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron wrapped in velvet. "I see a murderer, and I see a woman who is going to make sure you rot for what you did to Miller." Jinwoo let out a low, melodic laugh that sent a fresh wave of dread through her. "You see a murderer. I see a mirror. You spent 6 months lying to my face, eating my food and sleeping under my roof while you planned to tear my life apart. You smiled at me while you planted wires. You touched my hand while you calculated the cost of my head." He leaned down, his cheek brushing against hers, his glowing red eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "We are the same, you and I. We are two predators wearing the skin of ordinary people. You aren't a maid, and I am not just a boss. We are monsters who have mastered the art of the mask." "I did it for a reason," she spat, her voice cracking. "I did it for justice. You do it for greed. You do it for this sick obsession." "Justice is just the lie you tell yourself so you can sleep after you ruin lives," Jinwoo countered, his fingers tracing the white straps of her uniform. "But look at how well you wore the lie. You were so perfect, so convincing, that you even fooled yourself. You enjoyed the power of being the ghost in my halls. You enjoyed the thrill of the hunt as much as I did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tablet, the screen flickering to life. Aaliyah's breath hitched as she saw the live feed, A quiet, sun-drenched street in Accra. Her mother was walking to the market, her younger brother trailing behind her with a soccer ball. The camera followed them with a steady, professional smoothness. It wasn't a static security feed, it was a sniper's perspective. "They have such beautiful lives," Jinwoo murmured, his eyes never leaving hers in the mirror. "Transparent, simple, they don't wear masks, they don't know that their daughter is a ghost who trades in death." He tightened his grip on her shoulders, his face hardening. "If I am a monster for wanting to keep you, what are you for bringing this shadow into their world? You chose this life, Aaliyah. You chose the dark. And now that you've found someone who truly belongs here with you, you want to pretend you're innocent." Aaliyah stared at the screen, the vibrant colors of Ghana a stark, agonizing contrast to the blood-red light of the room. The leash was no longer a metaphor. It was wrapped around the throats of the only people she loved. "You think you're a hero," Jinwoo whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "But heroes don't survive in my world. Only mirrors do. Stop fighting the reflection, Aaliyah. Accept that you are mine, not because I caught you, but because no one else in the world knows what you really are behind that pretty, lying face." He turned the tablet off, leaving them in the shimmering teal and red darkness once more. Aaliyah looked at her reflection and, for the first time, she didn't see Agent Phoenix. She saw exactly what Jinwoo wanted her to see, a woman whose mask had been shattered, leaving nothing behind but the cold, hollow eyes of a survivor. The heavy, humid silence of the shrine was broken not by a word, but by the rhythmic, mechanical throb of a countdown only Aaliyah could hear in her head. Jinwoo was still basking in the glow of his psychological victory, his hands resting possessively on her shoulders as he admired their shared reflection. He thought he had broken her. He thought the sight of her family had turned her into a permanent fixture of his collection. He didn't realize that Agent Phoenix had always prepared for the moment the fire went out. Deep in the bowels of the estate, the secondary bypass she had spent 4 months wiring into the breaker box hit zero. A sudden, violent crack echoed through the walls as the main breakers surged and died. The gilded mirror went dark. The screen showing the streets of Accra vanished. For a heartbeat, the mansion was plunged into a terrifying, absolute pitch blackness that swallowed Jinwoo's silhouette and Aaliyah's fear alike. Then the nightmare began. The emergency generators kicked in, but they didn't restore the warm, golden light of the chandeliers. Instead, the estate's tactical failsafe flooded the hallways with a jarring, high-contrast split. From the floor vents, a cold, desaturated teal light washed upward, turning the air into a ghostly underwater tomb. From the ceiling, the security strobes bled a harsh, rhythmic crimson. The colors collided on Aaliyah's face, red on the left, teal on the right, shattering the Maid persona into the jagged fragments of a predator. Jinwoo's grip loosened in the sudden disorientation. In the strobe light, he looked less like a man and more like a glitching demon, his hooded coat billowing as he reached for the weapon tucked into his waistband. "Aaliyah," his voice roared, no longer calm or melodic. It was the sound of a god realizing his universe had developed a crack. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The darkness was her native tongue. While Jinwoo's eyes, adjusted to the luxury of the shrine, struggled to make sense of the strobing gore and ice, Aaliyah moved. She dropped low, her maid's skirt rustling like a warning as she swept his legs. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, the beretta skidding across the polished wood and disappearing into the teal shadows. She lunged toward the oak door, her movements fluid and lethal. The mansion was no longer a cage. It was a labyrinth, and she was the only one who knew where the Minotaur hid his keys. As she burst into the hallway, the aesthetic of the thumbnail came to life in every corner. The long corridor was a tunnel of shifting blood and frost. The silent, hooded guards she had feared were now stumbling in the strobe, their shadows stretching into monstrous, distorted shapes against the walls. "Lock the doors," Jinwoo's voice echoed from the shrine, distorted by the emergency klaxons. "Find her. If she moves, break her legs, but do not let her reach the perimeter." Aaliyah didn't head for the gates. She knew the gates were a death trap. Instead, she headed deeper into the teal-lit throat of the house, toward the ballroom. She could feel Jinwoo behind her, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic, a relentless hunter who didn't need light to find the scent of the woman he claimed to love. The red strobes caught the glint of his glowing eyes in the mirrors as he emerged into the hall. A silhouette of death framed in a doorway. She was no longer running from a boss. She was playing a game of hide-and-seek with a ghost. The blackout hadn't just cut the power, it had stripped away the last of the human masks. In the teal and red gloom, the Ice King and his maid were finally what they had always been, two monsters dancing in the dark, waiting to see who would bleed first. The ballroom was a cavern of shimmering ghosts and strobing gore. The teal emergency lights reflected off the floor-to-ceiling mirrors, creating an infinite loop of cold, blue shadows, while the overhead red sirens pulsed like a dying heart. Aaliyah pressed her back against a heavy velvet curtain, her lungs burning as she tasted the metallic tang of the ionized air. "I can hear your heart, Aaliyah." Jinwoo's voice drifted through the vast space, unnervingly close yet impossible to pin down in the echoing chamber. "It's the only honest thing you've ever given me." He stepped into a shaft of crimson light. He had discarded his hooded coat, standing now in his blood-stained dress shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a butcher who had fallen in love with his prize. In his hand, he held the single red rose from his lapel, twirling the thorn-covered stem between his fingers with a sickening nonchalance. Aaliyah's eyes darted across the room. She was unarmed, her black maid's uniform torn at the shoulder, her skin marked by the teal and red shadows of the nightmare she had unleashed. Her hand brushed against a small pedestal holding a crystal vase, a gift Jinwoo had received from a rival syndicate. Without a word, she swept it from the stand. The crash of crystal against the parquet floor was a lightning strike in the gloom. Before the echoes could die, Jinwoo was moving, a blur of silent, lethal speed. He lunged through the velvet curtains, his hand catching Aaliyah's throat and pinning her against a mirrored pillar. The glass behind her head spiderwebbed from the impact, reflecting 1,000 fractured versions of her terror. "You want to play the predator," he hissed, his red eyes inches from hers, burning with a light that transcended sanity. "Then bleed like one." He raised the rose, the sharpened thorns aimed at her cheek. But Aaliyah wasn't the trembling girl he had watched through the mirrors. As his grip tightened, she brought her hand up, clenching a jagged, 6-inch shard of the shattered crystal vase. She didn't hesitate. She drove the glass shard into the meat of his shoulder, twisting it with a guttural cry of reclaimed rage. Jinwoo roared, the sound a mix of agony and a twisted, ecstatic realization. He stumbled back, the rose falling from his grip as blood, dark and real, began to soak through his white shirt. He looked down at the wound, then up at Aaliyah, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face. "There she is," he whispered, coughing up a spray of crimson. "There is my agent Phoenix." Aaliyah didn't wait for his next move. She lunged again, not for his heart, but for the heavy velvet rope holding back the massive drapes. With a sharp tug, she brought the heavy fabric crashing down, entangling him in a shroud of red velvet. As he struggled against the weight, she grabbed a second, larger shard of glass from the floor. She stood over him, the teal light catching the edge of the crystal, her face a mask of cold, calculated execution. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, the hunter and the prey, the monster and the mirror. "You said we were the same," she whispered, her voice as sharp as the glass in her hand. "But you forgot one thing, Jinwoo. A mirror only reflects what's in front of it, and right now, all I see is a dead man." She didn't deliver the killing blow. Instead, she drove the glass into the electrical panel behind the curtain, a final surge of sparks erupting in a blinding white flash. In the chaos of the burst, she vanished into the smoke, leaving the Ice King alone in his velvet tomb, bleeding out amidst the ruins of his obsession. The smell of ozone and burning velvet followed Aaliyah as she clawed her way through the estate's service tunnel, emerging into the biting, rain-slicked air of a Seoul midnight. Behind her, the Han mansion, a fortress that had once seemed invincible, was exhaling thick, oily plumes of smoke into the sky. The emergency strobes were still flickering within, casting a sickly, pulsating violet glow against the rising flames. It looked like a pyre for a god who had finally run out of worshippers. Aaliyah didn't run toward the main gates. She vanished into the gray concrete arteries of the city, her black maid's uniform soaked through, the white straps now gray with ash and stained with Jinwoo's blood. She moved with the frantic, jagged energy of a ghost who had forgotten how to haunt, her lungs burning with the cold rain. She reached a pedestrian bridge overlooking the Han River and stopped, her hands gripping the rusted railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Across the water, the estate was a jagged silhouette of orange fire against the teal skyline. She reached into her pocket and felt the encrypted drive, the thing she had bled for, the thing that had cost Miller his life. It felt heavy, like a piece of leaden fruit from a poisoned tree. She had the data. She had her life. But as she stared at the burning wreckage of her 6-month prison, she didn't feel the rush of victory. She felt a cold, hollowing dread. She knew the layout of that house. She knew the strength of the vault. Most importantly, she knew the man who lived inside it, a man who considered fire just another form of purification. As the sirens of the fire brigades began to wail in the distance, a black sedan idled on the street below the bridge. For a terrifying second, the headlights caught a reflection in a puddle, a tall, hooded figure standing motionless by the water's edge. Her heart stopped. Her breath hitched in a ragged, familiar rhythm. She looked again, but the figure was gone, replaced by the shifting shadows of the rain. She realized then that the Ice King had told the truth about one thing. He had woven himself into the very fabric of her survival. She was no longer Agent Phoenix, and she was certainly no longer the invisible maid. She was a woman who would spend the rest of her life looking into the teal-lit corners of every room, searching for a pair of glowing red eyes. She pulled her coat tight around her, blending into the crowd of early-morning commuters. She was a shadow among millions, a face lost in the neon blur of Seoul. But as she walked, she felt the phantom sensation of a gloved hand twisting into her hair, a ghostly whisper of obsession echoing in the wind. Jinwoo Han hadn't died in that ballroom. A man like that didn't die. He simply waited for the smoke to clear so he could begin the hunt again. The fire hadn't ended their story. It had merely burned away the last of the pretenses. Somewhere in the city, the Ice King was bleeding, watching the same sky, and waiting for the moment he could reclaim the only masterpiece he had ever loved. Aaliyah stepped into the subway station, her eyes scanning the glass doors, knowing that from this moment on, every mirror in the world would be a window for him to watch her through. She was free, but in the dark she was still his. In the dark, everyone is a mirror. Jinwoo is watching, are you? Hit that subscribe button to see if Aaliyah can stay hidden, or if the red eyes will find her in the crowd. The obsession continues in part 2.